Hi everyone, we'll be waiting 2 to 3 minutes before starting the webinar to accommodate for the rest of the attendees who are in the middle of connecting. Welcome everyone, thanks for joining us and thanks for being part of our community. My name is Valen Kalika and I'll be your host for today. Now before we start, we'll go over the few reminders and over the webinar flow. But first and foremost, if at any time you experience issues viewing the stream and are using the web browser version of Teams, please refresh your browser. And if you're using the desktop app of Teams, please exit and rejoin. It works for the most of the time. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be shared publicly. We will post the recording on our community at aka.ms/security-webinars. Closed captions in several languages are available during the live broadcast, and you can enable them by clicking on the CC button located at the lower right corner of your screen. Please feel free to ask questions at any time by typing them in the live event Q&A window, simply by clicking on the Ask Question button. Be aware that any questions you post will be publicly visible. However, if you prefer, you can post your questions anonymously by checking the box right below where you enter it. Now, for our followers and for those of you who are viewing us for the first time here today, we're kicking off a new session of a webinar series on diversity in cybersecurity. And the flow is slightly different for those of you accustomed to our security product sessions. So the question of the day is, what is something special that we do during the month of March? Well, we give extra attention to all of the amazing accomplishments of strong and determined women all around us. And today, I would like to welcome Sue Lowe and Karen Dahmen as our guests. Sue is a developer on the team that's building Microsoft Mesh, the collaborative AR and VR services that were showcased not too long ago at Microsoft Ignite. Sue has been at Microsoft for 21 years, all that on OS and device teams, and has spent most of that time working on performance and telemetry. She is also the author of Raven, a young adult novel with the goal of making tech more accessible. And she will be presenting here shortly, sharing her journey of what led her to write the novel and more. And then Karen Dahmen will continue by interviewing Sue. Karen leads a PM team here at Microsoft focused on Azure Security Engineering for offensive security and healing at scale. This is amongst of several other functions that Karen performs. Karen has been with Microsoft for 9 years and has spent the last 13 years focusing on InfoSec. And without further ado, Sue, Karen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Milan. I'm super excited to kick off this series with you all today. I'm Karen Dahmen. My pronouns are she and her. And I'm super excited, like I mentioned, to celebrate, to kick off this series in celebration of Women's History Month. So a quick bit of context about the impetus for this series. I vividly recall my first security conference. This is less than 10 years ago. And after spending some time on the expo floor and a scan of the attendees, I definitely questioned whether I belonged in this field and industry. So this experience was just one part of what empowers me to help others have access to this field, get excited about it, and ultimately have a sense of belonging. So the purpose of this series is to envision a world where InfoSec professionals represent the planet that they protect. So as mentioned, we're going to do a quick spin through some content with Sue, and then we'll cover a few questions and we're going to open it up to Q&A for the audience. So do please feel free to ask questions throughout the discussion and we will get to as many as we can. So super honored and very excited to spend time with you today. Please welcome Sue Lowe.
Thank you. So as Karen said, I am Sue Lowe. I am a developer on the mixed reality team at Microsoft, and I'm here today to tell you something I think is very important and that is very overlooked in our attempts to increase the diversity in our industry. You know, when you talk about how do we increase the number of people from various backgrounds in our industry, there are a lot of different factors going on. There's no one root cause to the way the system is today, but there are many different things. And this is not a talk covering all of those, but I do want to point out that there's a great paper for you to go look for that was just published last week for International Women's Day about how to support and grow the women in cybersecurity, that talks very specifically about some of the aspects of this problem. I'm going to be covering actually the story that we tell about cybersecurity and about software and the effect that has on who enters our industry. So let's first talk about where we are. This is generic data about computer science, but immediately if you take a look at this, the green line is the percentage of women in computer science getting computer science degrees. You can see actually at some point around 1986, there was a peak where, well, the peak of the women was actually a few years before that, but around there was a peak in the number of women getting degrees, and the percentage peaked the day a little before. At around 37%. It's amazingly high. Most people don't know that number. Then we fell down to a plateau at about 28%. And then at about the .com bust time, it dropped again to another plateau at about 18%, and we're just barely starting to crawl our way back from that. So this is a dynamic number that's been changing over the years, and unfortunately not changing for the better for the most part. And it really irks me because I started in this industry in '99. Like, I was in that upper part, so it dropped on my watch. So this is me kind of trying to make a difference to bring us back up to where we've been in the past and back to a more even standard. When you look at racial diversity in computer science, you'll see, so what I've got here is it's all men on the left and women on the right. These are the percentages of different populations. So we've got the percentage of white men is slowly dropping. The percentage of Asian men is increasing. The percentage of Hispanic and Latino men is slightly increasing. If you look at the percentage of Black men, it's actually slightly decreasing over time. And then when you look at women, the percentage of white women is about steady. The percentage of Asian women is slightly increasing, and then the others, the Hispanic and Latino, are slightly increasing, and the Black women are also kind of steady or even decreasing. So overall, our percentages have not changed a lot over time. And in fact, the inroads that we make in women have mostly been among Asian women, so it's not being spread across all women either. So it's, you know, we're making some headway as percentage-wise, but among that, you know, increase in people in computer science, it's still, we have a lot of diversity to add. I tried to look for diversity numbers for cybersecurity. ISC Squared publishes some numbers, but we don't have trend lines like we do from the computer science degrees. So we're sitting at about 25% women at the moment, which actually is better than the percentage of women getting computer science degrees. So there's that. But even still, there's you know, quite a bit to go before we're 50-50. And I didn't find any data about racial and ethnic diversity in cybersecurity. So I'm here today to talk about the stories that we tell about computer science and about cybersecurity and the effect that that has on the diversity of our industry. So what do we hear from, you know, the stories around us about computer science? You know, we've got a lot of different stories, but the participants in those stories aren't exactly diverse. And if you look for stereotypes in our industry, you can actually pick out, I'm not going to call them positive and negative things, but there are aspects that are seen to be positive and then aspects that are seen to be different from the norm, you know. So you've got computer scientists are smart and make lots of money. These are generally seen as agreeable, but then they're also, well, you know, we're antisocial nerds. We are competitive, work alone, spend all our day coding, obsessed with what we do. And yeah, white and male or Asian and male is a very common theme that, you know, is a very pervasive set of things that people portray in the industry. And when you look at cybersecurity, well, at least the movie Hackers had a bit of diversity in it, but I think you'd have to say, if anything, you amp up, you know, by like a million, the antisocial awkwardness that is portrayed about people. And when you look at the people around you, like, you're all pretty normal, well-adjusted people, right? This is not the real story of our industry, but when, you know, we look at things in the media, that's what we're hearing, and it makes a difference in the people that decide to enter. You know, when you think about how do you feel when you match or don't match that stereotype that people tell about the industry, you know, if you feel like you fit in, you get a little bit of confidence from that. And if you don't, you get a little bit of doubt from that. And so let's say you had two people who are equally competent going through the same situation, just a common everyday roadblock. You know, you're working and you run into some kind of problem. If you've got confidence behind you, you're going to power through it, get through the experience, and, you know, solve the problem and feel like, you know, you just proved you belong to be here. But if you've got a little bit of doubt behind you, you run into that same roadblock. The roadblock itself becomes the proof to you that you don't belong here. And even if you do get through it, your confidence is shaken. And so these things happen to real people, and this is independent of the competence of the people involved in it. So that self-perception that we get, you know, is kind of self-reinforcing or self-destructing. So we need to be aware of the messaging that we're sending and make sure that we're telling people that they belong here. So how do you fix these things? You know, like, you don't own a media. If you do own a media conglomerate, come talk to me. But, you know, we're all just normal people in the world, right? What do we do about it? Well, the first thing is you have to help start countering those stories that people are telling themselves internally without even knowing it. You know, if there's somebody around you, just look around for the folks who have less confidence, right? And help strengthen that. Find, you know, whenever they accomplish something, make sure to tell them that they did a good job and say thank you. You know, tell them they're awesome. Find role models that they're going to feel connected to and make sure that they see those role models, you know, whether it's in your industry, in your team or in the industry as a whole. You know, help highlight those people that help anchor you into this place. Make sure that if there are people around you who are not going to promote for themselves, that you advocate for them. You know, keep an extra eye out for the folks that don't have that confidence behind them, and stand behind them for them. If you're in a position of making decisions about hiring or pay or promotions, make sure never to make those quickly. You know, counter the biases that we all as humans have by taking the time to think through all the facts in the matter rather than just quickly going through and assigning things. It'll help you not make snap judgments that tend to be more biased. And also, you know, going back to those stereotypes about how we're all antisocial people who work by ourselves, you know, like, remind everyone that teamwork is a valuable part of what we do, and call it out and make sure that we highlight and reward the fact that, no, we actually work together as a team. And okay, so here's the part where I'm going to also say that I think all of us need to stop calling ourselves geeks and nerds. And I'm sorry, I know just how fun and tempting it is to keep doing it. But the truth is, it helps promote that narrative that says you've got to be kind of an antisocial weirdo to be in our industry. I have a coworker who couldn't convince her son to do computer science because he didn't see himself as a nerd and didn't want to be associated with that. You know, like this. We get a certain amount of community from it, and maybe help welcome in some folks who wouldn't normally feel supported by society, and we've got to find a way to keep that. But at the same time, we've got to make ourselves just, you know, like have our image reflect the actual well-rounded people that we are. Talk about science and engineering not as an end of their own, but as a means to an end. So especially when you're talking to young people, you know, a lot of people these days are trying to increase the amount of attention on STEM, but I think it comes across a bit like, you know, STEM, you know, as, you know, an end of its own. And it comes across a little bit like a snake oil salesman, you know, you don't really want to be pushing it for science and computer science and engineering as an end, because if somebody doesn't immediately connect with that topic, then they're going to think it's not for them. But the truth is that these things are tools that get us to the things that we really do care about. So you've got to always find a connection when you're talking to someone young. Find a connection to the things that they love and the impact that they can have on society, instead of just talking about science as a value of its own. And then again, countering the stories of antisocial, you know, working by yourself. Share the stories of teams working together and things that you do in your industry that are not just writing code, because really there's a lot more to it, and we can all succeed as folks who love lots of different subjects and different activities, because there's a lot more to being in the computer field than just writing code, as we all know. And then, okay, so as I said, none of us are media, you know, own media conglomerates, but the truth is we all participate in that narrative of stories around us. You know, this is no longer a one-way screen, right? As we watch movies and read books and, you know, look at a podcast, or listen to a podcast or go to the theater, there are metrics, right? They're tallies of people attending and paying attention. We click like on things, we share things, we tweet them, you know, and as we do this, we are promoting the content that we watch, whether we want to or not. And so you need to be intentional about your consumption. If you go and watch some show that promotes, you know, these stereotypes that we're trying to eliminate, all you're actually doing is bringing that narrative along. You know, you're making that continue. What we need to do is find stories with alternate portrayals of people in software and cybersecurity that show a different kind of person and a more diverse person or group of people, so that we see that everybody belongs here. And this is true whether it's, looking at nonfiction and stories of people of the past, but also the fiction around us, So make sure that as you go through life, you don't just consume stories about people who look like you, or, find stories from authors that are different from you and about people that are different from you. And if you create any content, or if you know anybody who creates content, then hold that to a high bar. Make sure that you don't let your friend continue that stereotype about somebody in cybersecurity being a white male nerd, when the truth is, we're a lot richer than that. So that's really my spiel, is that the way we talk about our field and about science and technology makes a difference to the people who join the science and technology fields ultimately, and I think has an effect on the pipeline that we're all coming from. And so all of us can get involved in helping the people around us fight that internal stereotype to get the confidence that they need to get their work done. And together, if we all work on this, we can make a difference. So there's that. That's the end of my slides, and Karen and I are going to go ahead and talk.
Thank you, Sue. I love the frame. I'm hearing echo. Let's see. So we've got a good frame now and shared understanding of kind of one dimension, as you mentioned, of the pipeline problem, and some quick wins or suggestions for the audience, which I love. Tell us a little more about the inspiration in your journey and what prompted you to become an author.
Yeah, so all of this started years ago. One day I was driving in my car to work and listening to the radio, and on NPR they were talking about the fact that at that time the number of girls in archery was skyrocketing, and it was all due to the release of the Hunger Games movies and books. And that just floored me, and I was it suddenly struck me like, we need Hunger Games for software. We need a story that so captures people's attention and imagination that it makes them want to be here and makes them see themselves here. And so I started talking to my friends about how if Microsoft and all the tech companies were serious about trying to change the diversity in the industry, that they should be funding the creation of best-selling novels and movies about, stories of kids saving the world with software, just to get more people into it. And a friend of mine challenged me and said, ghostwriters exist. We could make this happen. Let's do it. And I had to think about it for a while, to think of what would I do if I were to hire a ghostwriter to tell a story for me. But it actually, over time, I started thinking about if I were to actually get a novel written, I came up with a list of characters and a plot that I really loved, and ultimately did turn it into a novel. So I hired a ghostwriter to write the novel, and then to pay for the cost of the ghostwriting, I ran a Kickstarter. And so among, if you've been working in the industry for about 20 years, lots of people who are happy to help support a project that is increasing the diversity. And so I managed to find a lot of people who are willing to support my Kickstarter and help pay for the project. So across all of that, we did get a novel written, and it was published last May. So go ahead and put up info about that. But really, this is not specifically about my novel, but more about the fact that, there's still these stories to fight that push people away, and we need to make sure we have lots of stories showing lots of people in our industry. So.
I love that. both from a standpoint of kind of hearing this problem in an analogous world and then really trying to take action in a way that I think is a beautiful kind of closed loop of seeing a problem and really trying to have a response. So I love that. In the book, I've read it and I was rereading it this morning just to make sure I had all the characters correct again. The group Raven, the hacker group, really they're focused on security, and they have a female leader as kind of their pod. And in the book, actually, you describe kind of for that character the times where sometimes it's hard for her to be credible with her kind of the companies she's supporting and the people that she has to work with. How important, how related were those stories kind of to your world, and how important was it for you to bring that narrative as well as those robust characters into the overall story? It's not the main frame, but it certainly makes its appearance in a way that if you didn't have exposure, you could start to see some of those themes come through.
Yeah, in the story, that main character, Fireball, she's the lead of her team, and nobody really gives her a hard time on her team or in the company. But since they are working at a company that gets hired by other clients that, to do things like help them with their security, they have to deal with the fact that adults look down at them and don't see them as credible folks who get things done. So it's, a lot of people do have to deal with that, having to prove themselves over and over on a daily basis. And it hasn't been a big problem for me, for whatever reason. I tend to talk like I know what I'm doing or something. So I haven't had too many problems, but I've known lots of people who do. And, all of us have to find ways to build that reputation.
Yeah, I love that. It's a very important distinction, right? When she's in her team, she doesn't face any of that constraint, but then in the kind of more in the adult world or out with clients. So kind of an interesting, relevant balance, I think, for people to understand. So you've spent 20 plus years as an engineer in tech. You mentioned that when you joined, it was kind of, there was a bit of an apex or kind of a journey of folks that were there. But how has your journey changed kind of or evolved over that 20 years?
Well, my, as you said, the numbers for women in software have actually decreased since I graduated from college, which is pretty frustrating. But the thing that I've seen over time is, even though that metric got worse, when I graduated from college, we would kind of look at each other and go, there are fewer women here, huh? Like, what are we gonna do? None of us knows what to do, and like turn around and go back to work. Whereas nowadays, there's a lot more recognition of the various reasons behind that, and intent to do something positive about it, both not just from women, but from men and allies around. And so even though the numbers are not better, the acknowledgement and the intent to make a difference is there now when it wasn't before. Nobody thought, well, we don't need to do anything about it. They just didn't know what. And now we're starting as a group to discover all the different things we can do. And so even though the numbers haven't moved a lot, I think they will over time. I'm pretty optimistic.
I love this. Like, it's this idea of kind of passive acknowledgement to a more, deepened understanding, and then kind of a more collective move to action, right? I think that's a really amazing trend if you look at that. And to your point, much more optimistic on kind of having results to show up for that.
Yeah.
So how do you think about, given that frame of there wasn't a lot of positive role models for you that perhaps looked like you as an engineer, maybe it wasn't top of mind, but what are those, role models and positive influences that you've had over your career that supported you and gave you confidence maybe when you questioned or wasn't sure how to proceed? How would you frame your role models and positive influences?
The top one that comes to mind is not a person that I ever met, but when I was in high school, you know, I already knew I wanted to work on computers. I've been hooked on computer stuff since somewhere around 10th grade when I learned how to code, and just loved the fact that I could make my computer do whatever I wanted. And so I've been hooked much earlier than many people, but even when I was in high school, I could only find a single female role model, and that was Roberta Williams. She made the King's Quest series of games, and I pretty much wanted to be Roberta Williams and make video games. And so if there was any one role model that I could go and thank, it would be her, because that honestly was the only software woman I ever saw before I got to college. So.
I love that. I'm a big King's Quest fan myself. Spent a lot of hours on that as a child. So thank you, Roberta, for that. So one thing, we talk about a lot in, frankly, comes up more commonly when you're talking about women professionals, but this idea of multi-identities. And what I mean by that is you're an engineer, you're an author, you're a mother of three. You also happen to be an amazing hockey player, right? All of these different facets of you as an individual. And you have an amazing post on your blog about it not being about time, because there's always this question of like, how do you make time for X or Y or foo, right? And so how do you think about kind of the integration of all those identities in kind of how you spend your time?
It's funny. Yeah, people think, you spend your time doing all these different things and it must be exhausting. But the truth is that, I spend my time on the things that I love. I happen to love my work, luckily, but I also love I play ice hockey, and it makes me happy to go join a group of women and play hockey for an hour. It makes me happy to even work with students and try to get them into computer science. I have these different activities where, a lot of them are focused on trying to increase diversity in software. And it's not that I do those things and they're a chore. It's that those are things that I just really enjoy doing and I get energy from. And so that blog post that you're referring to is really about how we're actually, as humans, like are beings of energy. There are things in our lives that give us energy and things in our lives that take the energy away. And you have to recognize that and make sure you're getting enough of the things that give you energy in order to sustain you through the things that you have to do that suck it out of you. And so, when people say, how do you have time to do all those things? In their head, actually, a lot of what they're thinking is, how do you have the energy to do all those things? And the truth is that you and I have different things that give us energy and take energy away. And the things that I do that might drain you actually energize me. And the things that you do that you enjoy, I might find draining. And so we just all have a different signature and a different set of things that we can accomplish because of the things that we as humans just enjoy doing. So
I love this, especially in the context of your energy signature and this transition from framing a problem into kind of what all of us can do to make these, to start solutioning, right, and acting, right? So energy signature, love that phrase from Sue. We are getting some cool questions coming in on the chat, so I'm going to start integrating those. Yeah. You talked a little bit about your role model, Roberta as your role model. There's a question around what motivated you to study computer science when you were choosing a major in the 90s?
Well, You know, when I was in about 4th grade, my dad brought home a TRS-80 color computer, the Coco, and it was this little box that it looked like a keyboard, and it could take a cartridge to play a game with, and you hooked it up to your TV. You know, this was my first like game console. And so at first my brother and I just used it to play games, but it came with this book about how to program in BASIC. And so my dad pulled it out and showed us that you could type in these little programs from the book and it would change the colors on the screen and stuff. And it really captured my imagination then that I could make this computer do things. And of course, you know, computer games back then were so much tamer than the ones we have now. You know, like the games I was playing on that were like the little piece of popcorn comes down and you catch it. You know, like there's the simplest games. Things that you could see yourself making, you know. And so as soon as I was able to type, I pulled that thing back out again and played with it and saw that I could make things that were kind of, you know, not as good as what was out, but not completely bad compared to the different games that you could acquire in the early 90s. So I could really just see myself accomplishing the things that I could see the other people around me accomplishing. And actually, you know, as video games get more and more advanced, for a while I felt that our industry was doomed because we had, you know, when people are playing fancy Xbox games, they can't see how they personally can participate in creating those things. But luckily, we've also got quite a lot of, you know, casual games that you can play on a phone and tools that you can use to learn how to get started with that and make your own stuff. And so people can still create things where they say, you know, maybe this isn't as good as the state of the art out there, but it's good enough to see that I could do these things. So that's really kind of what led me in, was being able to make things that were actually, you know, okay for a high school kid. So.
Amazing. And then, you know, there is this construct, right, in Minecraft and other areas where you're kind of building your own universe, right? And so there's some dimension of that makerspace style kind of contributions, as you mentioned. Okay, I'm gonna start picking through kind of the next set of questions. There's one that talks about, in our experience, do we think that cybersecurity field suffers from any of the same toxic tendencies that exist in other high-tech industries? For instance, Gamergate and the video game industry. I can try and take this one as well. Sue, I know you've got the hacker series in the book. I would say, you know, it's layered. I don't think it's at the same, this is my personal experience. It does not represent the whole community, but from my own experience, I don't see it in the same level of toxic tendencies specifically for maybe the gaming industry, but I do see some kind of security elitism, I'll say, which is how do we feel confident having folks enter the field without a prerequisite set of cybersecurity knowledge and ramping them into the domain, just like we would any other skill set. And so I see it more as an unwillingness to hire people without a certain skill and competency than it is toxic. I hope that answers the question. If you have more questions, feel free to post those as well. One person is saying, a Black woman in French cloud tech, very interesting talk. Thank you for the ideas. Ethnical stats are not possible in France, so it's very interesting to find out those statistics. Anything to add there, Sue?
Yeah, you know, I was even thinking about how ISC squared could gather ethnic and racial data, and it's not an easy topic. You know, first off, even categorizing people gets complicated, and if you went and took the categories that are taken by the U.S. government in order to even build the data that I had, which came from the education department's tallying of students getting degrees. Even if you use those same categories, you would also need to talk to a pretty large cross-section of the industry in order to gather statistically significant data, since there are many different categories. So it would be pretty difficult to get that kind of data. And yeah, it would have. I was really hoping to find some trend data for the cybersecurity industry, but I was coming to the conclusion that it's actually quite difficult to do that well.
Yeah, and I think as a company, Microsoft began publishing in the last several years our own statistics as a company amongst other tech companies. It wasn't just us. But just the power of our ability to kind of analyze the problem with that quantitative data, such a powerful kind of moment in general for as you mentioned, for all of us to start understanding this problem better.
Yeah, the very first thing of any kind of effort to make the world different and better is to at least be able to quantify where you are,
Right.
And to make it public helps avoid anybody being able to, plausibly deny that they knew what was going on. So that's the first step is making sure everyone is aware of where we are and that everyone can see whether or not we're making progress. So that's why I love digging up data about the diversity in software. Yeah,
I love that. I mean, I think it hopefully helps us frame the problem in a shared way. And you could argue, well, there's other data sources that might, have a different point of view or inference. But the point is that we're starting to talk about it the way we would talk about an engineering problem, right? With some grounding in truth and, to a dimension telemetry, right? That says, hey, this is where we're trending. It's getting hot over here or not, right? So I love that. It's a very classic engineering approach that I think resonates with this crew of IT professionals. So I love that. Okay, so there's another question here. What about self-taught women engineers, programmers, cyber pros without a degree in computer science? Men are very successful in switching careers to IT, for instance, while females are afraid to move to IT. So there's an interesting point I want to bring up here, and then Sue, I'd love to hear your perspective. One of the things we have spent time on is thinking a lot about the requirements for any given job description. So if you haven't heard, there's quite a bit of studies that talk about the gender differences when you look at requirements, where someone with a male identity is more inclined to take a job or at least apply for a job if they have, let's say, 80% of the qualifications in the required column. When you look at female identities, they're much less inclined to apply if they don't have 100% of the required qualifications. There's a number of reasons why underneath that. From a research standpoint, we can dig up some articles that show you that. But that's kind of an interesting one around, specifically to your point, self-taught, and kind of at what point are you credible enough to be in a role in that industry? It's a little bit different than the question. So I don't know, Sue, any perspective there about kind of the non-CS or non-traditional backgrounds into tech?
Yeah, we absolutely, as an industry, need to find a way to get past that, our kind of tendency to only trust and respect a computer science degree. It is absolutely true that we have a greater diversity of people coming from non-traditional backgrounds. If you go, it's even visible in, I have a version of this talk where I went and looked on your favorite search engine, and you search for terms like computer science, software, engineer, and see the diversity of the people that come up on the picture search. And then you go look at the diversity of people when you look for boot camp, coding boot camp, and it's very different. Even just in the images that people share of who should join a boot camp, you can see a great diversity in people. And as there are quite a lot of people who missed the computer science train either because they didn't have the resources or the exposure to try it out early, or because they didn't have the money, and it's a way to bring in a greater set of backgrounds. And honestly, quite a number of the things that I went through in college are not really required for me to do my job today. And if we can find a way to, you know, even identify what are the gaps, you know, if a boot camp or other coding experience isn't enough to make up for a computer science degree or for not having a computer science degree, you should be able to list out the things that somebody is missing if they didn't get that degree. What did you actually need from it? And then help people get that. And if you can't list it, then it's not really needed. What you really want is just someone who's got some, you know, experience. And that is something that a lot of people get by doing their own projects and you know, just getting started. So it's absolutely true that we need to find new ways in. And that's one of the best ways we have for increasing the diversity, both in software in general, but also in cybersecurity. And in fact, I think, you know, when you look at the numbers, how the percentage of women in cybersecurity is actually higher than the percentage of women getting computer science degrees. That's probably actually a bit of what's behind that number being higher, is that there are actually some other ways in from the back door.
Pun intended. Love it. Okay, really cool comment from someone about, thank you, Sue, for sharing your energy signature concept. It connects very well to Marcus Buckingham's definition of strength and weakness. A strength is not what you are good at, and a weakness is not what you are bad at. A strength is an activity that strengthens you. It draws you in, it makes time fly by while you're doing it, and it makes you feel strong. I love that. Thank you for sharing. Let's see, there is a question about your novel. So thinking about Raven, what reactions have you received from young adults reading your novel?
I've gotten really, I would categorize, I'll put this back up, I would categorize it in two buckets. One is the happy bucket of students who say, I just loved it, I read it in 2 days and I want the next one, you know. And then there's the one that makes me a little bit sad, where some people say, oh, it was kind of technical, I don't know. You know, I haven't really heard any stories of people saying, I didn't, you know, there was too much technical mumbo jumbo and I quit. But there were some who said I didn't entirely feel comfortable with that. And that makes me sad, because I might have, you know, further pushed those people away than brought them in. So that's one of my regrets of the novel, is we should have calmed the technical terms down a little bit more, just to avoid pushing out folks who were right on the edge of seeing themselves in it. But otherwise, you know, it's really character driven, and so it's you know, not about, there's coding in the book, but it's also really about people, right? And so you can connect to the characters without wanting to read about coding, and it's not like you spend the whole time reading about them writing for loops and things.
And I think it's, to your point, it's the engineering components are not the center stage. It's the human interest stories, like you meant it. It's the character-led stories of, you know, there's other components, right? That, you know, they're living in this home essentially for orphans, and, you know, there's all these layers outside of the technology, but there, you know, you bring in the technical credibility of 20 years of engineering and being kind of bringing that into the fold as well. So interesting feedback.
There are a couple other things I was trying to put in the novel that didn't entirely come through. One is that there's more that you can do. You know, if you like to write code, great. You can, you know, work in the software industry, but you can also work in software if you don't like writing code. And I was trying to have some characters who do different activities too. So, for example, the character Wiz is intended to be someone who really gets people and understands, you know, users to the point where she can do things like design user interfaces that people are going to understand, or, you know, ask people questions and really get what's behind them. And so Wiz actually is our character that who goes and talks to the hackers or the AI as they're going through the story to try to understand what's behind it. And so that was one of the intents of the characters. And another is that, you know, a lot of what we do is also just digging through data. And this comes a little bit from my own background as more of a performance engineer. You know, a big chunk of my career has been spent digging through data to try to find answers to questions. And I'm sure there's quite a bit of that in the security industry as well. And you know, you don't have to like to write code in order to get a thrill out of that, you know, detective chase. So they do quite a bit of that in the book, is just like digging around looking for answers. And so I was trying to portray, you know, different roles that you can play related to software that are not all coding. The second thing that was in the book that it was kind of subtle, but is just the fact that, you know, they're taking care of each other, you know, like they're not competing with each other to get things done. And in fact, there's this character mom who, you know, like right on at the start of the book is like making them eat their fruit because they, you know, need to get their nutrition. And she comes and like makes them eat sandwiches when they're up late working. And, you know, we can portray stories of software and tech without it all having to be some kind of cutthroat fight to the death. And so there's a bit of that in this novel too.
Yeah, this deep sense of community that comes from banding together to solve the problem, to face the evilness out there, which I think is completely relatable. I did inadvertently skip over one question I want to cover, which is, do we think it's easier for women in tech to land positions in other fields outside of security? You know, the data is limited here. I think Sue mentioned a bit that in some ways, if we are allowed, you know, if we have higher percentage of women in cybersecurity than we do in engineering, and the statistics that Sue presented for engineering and computer science, we might actually have made it more accessible. I will tell you, every time I do any sort of recruiting event, I get anywhere from 10, depending on the number of people, but at least 10 people that come to me and have this confessional. They say, hey, I'm super interested in this opportunity, but I have to confess I'm not a security person. And I always ask, what do you mean by that, right? And they say, well, I have all this technical credibility, which is information security related, but I'm not a security person, which I think is really what drew me to Sue when I first met her, was the stories they're telling themselves are they don't fit in the industry, right? Or they don't fit in the profession. And so, you know, my personal take is we still haven't reached a level of kind of accessibility to the broader world. And there still is kind of, as I framed it, what I consider to be information security elitism, that I think we all play a role in kind of dispelling and just balancing in general with the stories we tell. Next question is, with the pandemic-driven shift to work from home, do we think this might open up the field for more diverse candidates who face additional barriers to entry? For instance, qualified, interested people who cannot afford to live in the major metros. Sue, do you have any perspective on that one?
I think it probably absolutely does. You know, both in terms of people being able to be more geographically diverse, as they mention, as well as, you know, it makes less of a difference who's behind that computer screen. Like it's not even like visibly there what my look and identity is on a daily basis when I'm not in the room with you. There's also, sorry, I had a thought that I lost, but it adds more flexibility, right? A lot of people, it's difficult as a parent to be home and having to like deal with my kids being here. But the one good thing is I'm also actually at home when my kids need me to be home. you know. And so while it is both a blessing and a curse as a parent to be at home with my kids right now, it does add a fair bit of flexibility to how I get my work done. And hopefully that flexibility will continue, because that helps keep people able to stay in the industry.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think the geographic component is a big part of the question, and just kind of what flexibility tech careers in general provide as we think about everyone transitioning to work from home, or at least some population. Awesome. Any final questions? Feel free to post. I'm going to ask Sue one last question. So you have an incredible audience here across a myriad of industries in attendance. What would be kind of your final takeaway for this crew that you would want them to leave this conversation with?
You know, I want all of us to change the way we talk about things, and I want all of us to start consuming a more diverse set of stories. So I guess if you read content at all, you know, if you go watching movies, reading books, like, make sure that you are seeking out stories by people who don't just look like you, about people who don't just look like you. Go find more, you know, expand your world by hearing from more voices, I guess, would be a call to action that I'd like to put on everyone. And whenever you do talk about our industry and your job, make sure to, you know, relate it to the people in front of you, so that they feel like they can participate too.
Love it. Okay, one final question we'll take. We have a comment that says, personal experience have shown not many aim for a higher than level 1 or level 2 IT positions. How can we better support and encourage aiming for a higher and more advanced position, especially as we are a company that would rather aim to hire internally than externally? So the level differences is an important one. Any thoughts on that one, Sue, as you think about kind of accessibility of roles and people applying to a given role?
If people aren't aspiring to higher levels, you know, either they think that they can't do it, or they think they won't enjoy it, right? I guess this is true of any job. You know, you want it because you think you can do it and you think you'll like it. If people don't want that, you've got to break down those two things. You know, you've got to help them see that they can do it, maybe by showing the activities involved and showing that they can do those things, or, you know, pointing out every time they get stuff done that's all that would have been needed to do the other job. And then second, showing that, you know, whatever they think is going to be terrible about it is not so terrible. That's really, I guess, how I would break it down, is try to make sure they see that they can enjoy it and make sure that they see that they can do it.
Love it. So with that, we have a Q&A overflow site posted, as well as webinar feedback. Please do send us feedback. We would love to learn and grow together in this series, and a huge debt of gratitude. Thank you so much, Sue, for spending time with us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much to both of you. Thanks, Sue, for sharing your story. That was incredible. And Karen, thank you so much for your support. That really means a lot to our community. And remember that the best way to ensure that you don't miss any future webinars or major announcements, that is, please visit our landing page at aka.ms/securitycommunity. And while you're there, you'll find easy ways to navigate and find the resources and the learning content relevant to our security products and to your needs. A good start would be by browsing our bite-sized product videos, the Ninja trainings, recordings of past webinars, GitHub communities, and more. And we'd love to hear your feedback on how we can improve on these webinars. Please Visit us and submit your feedback at aka.ms/security webinar feedback. We have also provided a QR code here for quick access if that helps. So thank you all for being part of our community, and thank you for joining us on these webinars, and we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.